Hello and welcome to Doug Kirby's Common Characteristics of Effective Sex Education Programs. This is an important topic if you're going to assess what quality sex education is and make decisions for possibly a group of people or a school or any other setting where you need to address sexual behavior, particularly of youth. And this is Professor Spicer, Sexuality and Social Work. So the first characteristic, according to Douglas Kirby's research, is that effective sex education programs included multiple individuals and sometimes groups with expertise in different areas of design of the curriculum. So, they often included people with different backgrounds and expertise, especially in areas of theory of health behavior, research on adolescent sexual behavior, and risk and protective factors affecting that behavior. Theory of instructional design, which is how to change each risk and protective factor, elements of good curriculum design, specific activities used to teach youth about sexual topics, cultural knowledge, and evaluation. Sometimes the same person had expertise in more than one of these areas. Knowledge about evaluation may not have been a prerequisite for developing an effective curriculum, but may have been an artifact of the research component of all of the studies that Kirby was doing. Sometimes, but not always, the individuals included stakeholders from the communities or organizations involved. Second factor is assessed the relevant needs and assets of the young people they were targeting. So the curriculum developers typically reviewed quantitative data on HIV and other STD or pregnancy rates, as well as any survey data on young adult sexual behavior. To the extent feasible, they reviewed these data for their target population. So for instance, in Buffalo, you saw the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and it had all of those rates and information on the sexual behavior in Buffalo. That would be a great addition to any kind of needs assessment that would be done to develop a specific program to reach youth in Buffalo. Although it wouldn't be everything. So you would want to do focus groups and interviews with youth, and also interview adults working with youth on reproductive health concerns. Maybe you would want to go to Planned Parenthood and talk to the health center staff there. So you'd ask questions about why youth were having sex, if they were always consensual, and why or why not they would be using condoms or other forms of birth control during sex. And this just gives you a basic amount of information so that you know what your program should teach. A lot of people do make a lot of assumptions about what the program should cover. That's why the needs assessments, they really give you that specific feel for any community. Also used a logic model approach to develop the curriculum. So in public health, a logic model specifies how interventions can affect behavior and achieve a health goal. And curriculum developers may or may not have consciously developed a formal logic model, but their discussion of the development of the curriculum, their use of theory, and their measurement of both sexual and contraceptive behaviors, and the mediating factors affecting those behaviors, suggests that they completed the following 4 steps. So, 1, the curriculum developers specified the health goals they were trying to achieve. 2, curriculum developers identified the particularly important behaviors that lead to HIV/STD transmission or pregnancy or their prevention. So, for instance, abstaining from sex or using condoms or contraception. They used their knowledge of theory and research, focus groups, and other interviews with youth professionals working with youth, and personal experience to identify some psychosocial, sexual risk, and protective factors affecting those behaviors. So these included factors that were measured and discussed as part of Kirby's work, and some of that was knowledge about risk of sex and methods of protection, personal values and attitudes about sex and condoms, perception of peer norms about sex and condoms, how comfortable they were with using condoms or refusing sex, those kind of assessment of their own personal skills. And finally, they develop particular activities to address many or all of these risk and protective factors that they identified. So sometimes they used educational theory to develop these activities. So number 4, for example, design activities consistent with community values and available resources. So you've got staff time, staff skills, facility, space, supplies, all these factors were considered before the design of the curriculum. So in communities that greatly valued abstinence among young people, abstinence was emphasized as the safest or best approach for young people. In schools with teachers inexperienced in using role plays, less or no emphasis was placed on students practicing role plays. In communities that lacked video equipment, videos and films were not incorporated. Schools that lacked paper and pencils, individual worksheets were not used. So this is the kind of thing that may seem obvious at first, but if you're not thinking about it and you choose a program and you find out about these things later, it just hurts the implementation phase of the program and could reduce its effectiveness. 5, they pilot tested the program. So a lot of curriculum developers will pilot test some or all of the activities. I know when I wrote my program, the Responsible Males program, and the other program, the Circle of Friends program, absolutely pilot tested and then brought it back to redesign every time after we pilot tested. So it's pilot, redesign, and it's probably the most effective way to do it. So if you're looking for sex education programs and you see that one was pilot tested, that's definitely a bonus. Number 6, the curriculum focused on at least one of 3 health goals: the prevention of HIV or other STDs and or unintended pregnancy. So effective curricula typically focused on young people's susceptibility to HIV and other STDs and or pregnancy and the negative consequences of contracting HIV and other STDs or becoming pregnant. They gave clear message about the health goals, namely that if young people have unprotected sex, they would be likely to contract HIV or another STD or to become pregnant or cause a pregnancy if it's a guy, and that there were negative consequences associated with these outcomes. So in the process of doing this, they strove to motivate young people to want to avoid STDs and unintended pregnancy. Number 7, they focused narrowly on specific behaviors leading to these health goals, gave clear messages about these behaviors, and addressed situations that might lead to them and how to avoid them. So, curricula designed to prevent pregnancy focused on abstinence, frequency of sex, to sort of reduce the frequency of sex, and using contraception. Effective curricula focused on these behaviors in a variety of ways. So first, they talked explicitly about sex, condom use, and contraceptive use. They identified specific situations that might lead to unwanted sex or unprotected sex and discussed how to avoid these things and how to get out of them. They described how to use condoms or contraceptives correctly and how to overcome barriers for obtaining and using condoms and other forms of contraception. So in contrast, many but not all of these effective curricula spent relatively little time talking about broader issues of sexuality, like being in love and that sort of thing. A few, but only a few, talked about gender roles. When they did so, they did relate the gender roles back to sexual or protective factors. Second, effective curricula gave clear and consistent behavioral message about these sexual and protective behaviors. Nearly all of the effective programs repeated numerous times in different ways a very clear and consistent message about these behaviors. In fact, most activities in the curricula were designed to change behaviors so they'd be more consistent with the message. So if you think back to the hot cognition stuff, they're really trying to bias towards health, those attitudes in advance, so that the attitude would then change the behavior. 8. They focused on specific sexual psychosocial factors that affected the specified behaviors and changed some of those factors. So, programs designed to reduce sexual activity either by delaying the initiation of sex, reducing the frequency of sex, or increasing the return to abstinence, or reducing the number of sexual partners focused on one set of factors, while programs designed to increase condom or contraceptive use tended to focus on a different but overlapping set of factors. So some of these factors are knowledge, including knowledge of sexual issues, HIV, other STIs, and pregnancy, including methods of prevention. Perception of HIV risk. So a lot of people don't realize that some people really are more at risk than others, and if you have a way of making it clear to people that they can assess their own risk through their behaviors, it might be a wake-up call sometimes. Personal values about sex and abstinence, also important. Attitudes towards condoms, including barriers to their use. Perception of peer norms and behaviors about sex. So, and I say perception because, there's never really, you never know for sure who's actually having sex and who's not as an adolescent. Sometimes it seems like everybody's having sex, when that's probably not the case. I know that in some high schools in Buffalo, the sexual activity rate is as high as 75%, but in others it's as low as 25%. But there might be an equal perception among the peers in each of those schools that everybody's having sex. So what you want to do is address the perception and sort of burst that bubble and break that myth, so it relieves a little bit of the pressure. The next one is self-efficacy to refuse sex and to use condoms. So, young people have to have self-confidence that they can actually do this, or they're not going to try. The next is intention to abstain from sex or to restrict sex partners. In my curriculum circle of friends for girls, I make a really big deal out of partner selection. Who is this person? Why should they be able to have sex with me, and that sort of thing. And what if they became the parent of my child? Would they be a good parent? Who would that be? Just to add a whole bunch of criteria upon which young people can judge their sexual partners. Communication with parents or other adults about sex, condoms, or contraception is also part of this. Kids have to know that they can go to parents or some other responsible adult in their life to get information. Another one is self-efficacy to avoid STDs and HIV risk and risk behaviors. Actual avoidance of places and situations that might lead to sex. And intention to use a condom. And again, going back to that hot cognition, you think that intention to use a condom seems like such a no-brainer, but when people have a directional goal, that intention to use a condom might not be there. Okay, moving on. Attempted to create a safe environment for youth to participate. So virtually all of the effective programs started by creating a set of ground rules for class involvement. This isn't just a safe physical environment, this is a safe emotional environment. Typically these included rules such as not expressing put-downs, not asking personal questions, expecting the right to refrain from answering questions, recognizing that all questions are legitimate questions, not interrupting people, respecting other people's opinions, maintaining confidentiality of the views expressed. So, whatever happens in the program stays in the program kind of thing. Consistent with this characteristic to help make youth more comfortable talking about sexual topics, some curricula encourage educators to give positive recognition and positive reinforcement. In addition to establishing ground rules, some programs try to create a safe environment by separating the class into same-sex groups for certain topics, or occasionally limiting the entire course to only one sex. So the two programs that I wrote were Responsible Males and Circle of Friends. That was a program for guys and a program for girls. They were specifically designed that way. I didn't do it that way because it was more or less effective. I did it because it was the request of the places that it was going to be facilitated in, and it seemed like everybody was just going to be more comfortable with that sort of arrangement. So, that was part of the needs assessment. Next. Included multiple instructionally sound activities designed to change each of the targeted risk and protective factors. So in order to meet the needs of the targeted young people and to change the selected risk and protective factors, effective programs incorporated multiple activities to change these factors. Often, individual activities were linked to specific factors. Other times they were addressed to multiple factors. So this means that you might do a activity teaching proper condom use. While you're trying to increase their feeling of self-efficacy with condom use, you might weave some other factors in there, like communication with your partner, where to buy them. Those other kinds of specific factors can be part of one activity. But they don't have to be. You could just keep it really simple and have a one-to-one ratio with your activities to your, the factors that they're addressing. Number 11, employed instructionally sound teaching methods that actively involve the participants, that help participants personalize the information, and that were designed to change each group of risk and protective factors. So the following teaching methods were most commonly implemented. You got short lectures, class discussions, small group work, video presentations, stories, live skits, role plays, simulations of risk, competitive games, forced choice activities, surveys of attitudes and intentions with anonymous presentation of results, problem-solving activities, worksheets, homework assignments, including assignments to talk with parents or other adults, which turns out to be a very effective way to involve parents, actually more effective way to involve parents than actually trying to teach parents directly. Drugstore visits, clinic visits, question boxes, hotlines, condom demonstrations, quizzes, and a variety of other interactive activities. So nearly all of these instructional methods were interactive and engaged youth. Some directly encourage youth to apply the concepts to their own lives. And it's really the interactive quality that these teaching methods use to engage youth, and it really does open up the youth to more knowledge, and it makes them more receptive to the information. 12. Employed activities, instructional methods, and behavioral messages that were appropriate to the youth's culture, developmental stage, and sexual experience. So some curricula were designed for specific racial or ethnic groups and emphasized the high rates of HIV, other STDs, or pregnancy among those groups, and the need for young people to be responsible not only to themselves, but also to their communities by avoiding unprotected sex. So other curricula were designed specifically for young women and emphasized that young women can be powerful and be in control in sexual situations, and that really speaks to, one of the identified risk factors for girls is that they don't have as much sexual agency, and it's a problem. Most curricula were consistent with the developmental age and sexual experience of the students. Activities for younger youth sometimes included more basic information, less advanced cognitive tasks, less difficult activities, while those for older youth did the reverse. For example, role-playing without scripts was more commonly implemented among older youth than among younger youth. As described in the study, for younger, less sexually experienced youth, programs focus more on abstinence, while older, more sexually experienced youth, programs focus more on condoms. And that then is the more effective way to do it. 13. They covered topics in a logical sequence. This seems like a no-brainer, but not all programs do. In the logical sequence that in the Kirby study, that he identified. It's not the only logical sequence, but it's the one that he identified. Basic information about HIV, other STDs, or pregnancy, including susceptibility and severity of HIV, other STDs, and pregnancy. Discussion of behaviors to reduce vulnerability, knowledge, values, and attitudes and barriers related to those behaviors, and skills needed to perform these behaviors. It's pretty much the logical sequence for each topic. Next. 14. Secured at least minimal support from appropriate authorities. Now, this one doesn't always happen. Sometimes you've got a rogue teacher, or somebody who really wants to make sure that the kids are getting what they need, and they don't go through the proper channels, and sometimes this can lead to undesirable consequences, unintended consequences. But if everybody's on the same page, then it tends to be, it'll go much smoother. So in the study, virtually all of the effective programs obtained approval from authorities, such as the ministries of health or education, school principals, clinic directors, or directors of local youth-based organizations. It might be partially because they were all part of a study that this was present. But I can tell you that whether you're part of a study or not, you just need all the administrators to be on the same page before you start implementing programming. 15. Selected educators with desired characteristics whenever possible, trained them, and provided monitoring, supervision, and support. While some programs were implemented by classroom teachers in whatever classes were appropriate, other programs hired their own educators and had more control over who they hired. Commonly, they hired people who they believed could relate to youth, who had a background in health education, especially sex or HIV education. Notably, most studies did not examine the impact of the characteristics of the educators on behavior change. However, one study did randomly assign youth to different types of educators and found that matching youth's race or ethnicity or gender with that of the educators did not have a significant impact on behavior change. Similarly, 2 studies randomly assigned youth to receive either adult-taught or peer-taught sex and HIV education, and found that the age of the educators did not affect program effectiveness either. Qualitative evaluations of multiple programs have found that what is most important to young people is whether the educator can relate to youth, and not the age or race or sex of the educator. A lot of people are surprised to hear that, but when you hear that it's really can they relate or can they not relate, that really is the bottom line. 16. Implemented needed activities to recruit and retain youth. Again, this sounds like such a no-brainer. But effective programs implemented activities necessary to recruit and retain youth and avoided or overcame obstacles to their attendance. So, I'm going to tell you that attendance is a really big deal. In the research world, they're going to call that dosage. How much of the program did they get? A lot of these programs, it's not just a one-time deal. It's multiple sessions over a period of time. And in a community setting, if you're going to a Boys and Girls Club or a church or something like that, where the kids don't have to be there, so they can choose to come or not, or they rely on somebody else to get them there, and that may or may not be present. Their parents may or may not know, and if their parents do know and they're okay with them coming, they're not going to stop them halfway through when they find out. These kind of things. Transportation, like that's, you can give out bus tokens or something like that. It's what we do in Buffalo a lot. Implemented activities at convenient times. So maybe right after school is a good time because they're heading home. They don't want to head home yet. Maybe they want to have a dinner that you could give them, and somehow you're assuring their safety. Again, it's a big deal. So number 17, implemented curricula with a reasonable amount of fidelity. So most of the effective programs implemented all or nearly all the activities in the curriculum as designed in the research study, mainly because it was part of a research study and they were studying the effectiveness of the programs, and so they facilitated them with near perfect fidelity. On the other hand, results of replication studies provide some information about the importance of fidelity for those few curricula that were evaluated multiple times. There's not that many, but they do exist. But they're more likely, you're more likely to be effective if, they're more likely to be ineffective or rendered ineffective if they're shortened considerably. That's a problem. If activities that focus on increasing condom use are omitted, which is something, again, when you have an evidence-based program, they're shown to affect or increase condom use, but you take it to a school that's too shy to do condom demonstration. They're like, well, yeah, you could do this, but just take out those activities. And then people go ahead and do that. Well, that completely takes away the effectiveness of the program, or definitely decreases it to a degree. And then the last one, they're designed for and evaluated in community settings, but then they get implemented in classroom settings in schools, and they just don't fit, so they're less effective. So those are the 17 characteristics that Doug Kirby identified in his research and research reviews of sex ed programs. But there's more. There's additional characteristics. First, things that were increased effectiveness or contributed to effectiveness is kind of a better way to use the additional characteristics. Programs were implemented after school on weekends or in non-school settings. Youth volunteered to participate in them. That means they weren't a captive audience or forced to. Programs focused primarily on one behavior, typically condom use. Programs were implemented in small groups of about 6 or so youth. That's a pretty small group. And even in sex education, that's a difficult thing to do, to put resources into such small group sizes. More likely now, what's going on in Buffalo, the smallest group size you're going to see is 12. That's with a program called Be Proud, Be Responsible. Although that group size is, meant for that program. So you're operating within fidelity to have a group size that large, and you can expect the results to translate to multiple groups. So what I'm trying to say is it doesn't have to be 6 or so. It really, if you have a program that was evaluated as effective for larger groups, then that's fine. Characteristics contributing to long-term effectiveness, which is, a lot of these programs, they get these risk and protective factors like frequency of sex or age of first sex or frequency of condom use, these kind of things, and they work on them. And usually, if a program comes out and it's effective and it can be called an evidence-based program, if it changes those behaviors for as little as 3 months, and that is not really long-term effectiveness. Long-term effectiveness, you're talking, more than a year, or even throughout somebody's youth life. So these programs, long-term effectiveness programs, were likely to be implemented in schools. They included 12 or more sessions, and they included sequential sessions over multiple years. So a perfect example of that is Seattle and King County's FLASH program, Family Life and Sexual Health, and they have a sort of K through college and special ed sections that just is a comprehensive multiple sequential session over multiple years, and that you can expect to be more effective than a one-time shot or a program with less than 12 sessions. So that's it. Now the conclusion here is, despite limitations, the evidence for positive impact on behavior of curriculum and group-based sex and HIV education programs for adolescents and young adults is quite strong and encouraging, and effective programs had common characteristics. Now that's something we can learn from. We can take those common characteristics, we can use them to assess any candidate as a sex education program, or it can give us a great starting point and what to look for when we're trying to build a new one for ourselves. So that is Doug Kirby's 17 characteristics of effective sex education programs, and it's the gold standard. Doug Kirby, as a researcher, as a source of information about sex education, and all of the tools that he developed, they are the gold standard in this field of sex education. You can't go wrong. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.